here. I've been nervous about this presentation the entire time, so I'm glad to be standing on the stage and finally giving it to you. So today I'll be talking about monetization portion of growth model, because growth models are great, but I'd want to monetize that. But a little bit about myself. As I said, I'm Elena Verna. I'm currently head of growth at Amplitude, which is a really fantastic place, and I've been learning so much from them. But I'm also a partner and content creator for Reforge, creating both programs for them and partnering with them on future growth trajectories. I'm a full-time advisor when I'm not having my interim positions, and I have a privilege of working with incredible companies like MongoDB, Crisp, and many others. I'm a board member at Metlify, and I have a lot of my full-time experiences from Miro, SurveyMonkey, Malwarebytes, and list goes on. So we've heard about Adam's loops, and loops are incredible. You should all be thinking about how to grow your product from loops perspective and never funnels. That doesn't mean funnels are not good. Funnels have their place in your growth ecosystem. They fuel loops at the beginning for the flywheel to start kicking into high gear, but don't place all of your bets on funnels, because then it's incredibly hard to maintain those growth levels over and over again. So loops are definitely the way to build a sustainable, predictable, and competitively defensible growth model. But I say, Adam, loops are fun, but how do we make money? Because we are evaluated on our ability to generate business revenue. So although solving for acquisition and retention is absolute key, we need to generate revenue for our businesses. Now, revenue is an outcome. It's not a KPI. You shouldn't be looking at it as a metric. It's an outcome of a successful monetization strategy. So we have to be very strategic about how we actually monetize our growth ecosystem in order to generate a successful business. So I have a question for you. What should you be doing first? Growth model or monetization? It's a trick question. You should be doing both at the same time, because the overlap between acquisition, retention, and monetization is the core of your growth model. But we don't treat it as that. We make monetization mistakes over and over and over again. Some of them include, we make monetization decisions with the business view only. How can I hit this forecast? How can I generate money? I don't think about customer. I don't think about my growth model, but I think about my business outcome only. We treat monetization as a silo from growth. It's owned by sales, your chief revenue officer, maybe your strategy team. But monetization is a core component of your growth model. And if your growth and product and sales teams don't work together in understanding how it interacts, it creates very short-term lived outcomes. We consider all revenue good revenue. Dollar is a dollar, we say. We bring it in. Even if a dollar today that we collect really jeopardizes our way to grow a year, or 2, or 3 years from now. Not all revenue is a good revenue for your business. We look at monetization as just price. It's easy. It's that price tag. How much are we charging? Can we increase the price? Should we decrease the price? Monetization model is so much more than that. We set and forget monetization strategies. How many of you have run an experimentation on your monetization in the last 3 months? A few, 6 months? Last year? The entire room should be having their hands up. If you have not iterated and explored and evolved your monetization strategy in the last year, in the last 3 months, you're falling behind. But we're scared of touching it because it impacts so many people. And finally, we use monetization as a short-term growth lever. We have a forecast target for this quarter. What do we do to hit it? We do anything and everything to squeeze our users to get them to pay for us a little bit more. We don't think about it strategically of how we can enable our business growth. We only think about it of how we can hit these forecast targets. So as a reminder, our growth system is this. We have inputs of monetization, acquisition, and retention and engagement, wrapped around by growth model, which we apply user psychology for to understand what problems we need to solve for our customers, apply experimentation to bridge causality and correlation relationships, to bridge the gap between perception and reality, to iterate on our growth model. You need to work on your monetization just like you're working on acquisition and retention. So what could be better than the 4-step guide for your monetization? Let alone the 3-step. I have 4, Adam. So, step number 1, monetization introduces friction. For our business, it's an outcome that we're so desire to achieve. But for our customers, it's a friction in your product experience. So the question that you have to ask is how much friction can you both customer and growth model sustain with your monetization? We need to abide by this equation. Price has to be lower than perceived value. Makes sense. I have to charge lower than the value, plus friction. We forget about that friction part a lot of times. We say, well, I exchange value with my customer, that's how I should be monetizing. But it takes customer a lot of friction to get to that value. So we have to be careful, look at the perceived value, plus friction that should guide our price. There's 4 scales of the friction that can be introduced by monetization model. Number 1 is scale. Are your value metrics easy to measure and predict? Or are your value metrics hard to measure and predict? I'll have a little bit on that later. I'll have a good chart on it of talking about the different types of monetization metrics, value metrics, and why they're hard to predict. What are you monetizing on? Can your customer very clearly understand that this feature is going to do this for me? Can they understand and be familiar with it? Or you're a new product and you're creating new way of doing things and there's a lot of unfamiliarity. If they don't get it, your friction is really high. So you have to combat that friction constantly in order for the perceived value to continuously go up, which brings down the friction. Amount. How much we charge is a friction for our customers. You might be $1 a month product, which is still a friction to some. You might be $50,000 a month product. That's a huge friction to overcome. How do you constantly work on increasing perceived value and lowering the friction? And the last one is when. When is important. It has to be strategic because it can either kill your acquisition and retention or it can enable it and amplify it. So when you're charging a customer, has to be thought through very carefully. So what are our options on when? Perceived friction reduces with increased engagement. Every single customer journey starts with an acquisition event in your product. It moves into the setup moment. Hopefully they reach an aha moment, that first value exchange that produces in your product and user. And then they go into the first habit loop, which completes their activation. And then they repeat the habit loop over and over and over again, going into your core frequency of engagement. Now, the earlier you strike your monetization intercept, the higher friction is. And by the way, lower is perceived value, because I haven't actually experienced value of the product. The further you push your monetization intercept down that user journey, the lower your friction is, the higher your perceived value. This is why usage-based pricing has been making waves across our industry, because then it pushes it based on usage and then monetizes it much later in the game, allowing the customer to understand the value that they're going to get, which reduces the friction of them actually understanding what they're paying for. Now, this is where a lot of tactics such as trial, freemium, reverse trials have been played by the companies in order to reduce that friction on top of acquisition. Because we don't want to give our products away. We want to have a healthy ability to monetize. But how do we show that value? How do we give them a glimpse of that? So trial is the most traditional way to do it. You set a 7-day or 30-day trial. Your customers are supposed to try it and receive all of that value in a fixed amount of time. Then afterwards, you monetize some because they do get past the value exchange, and some of them that don't, they just don't get to use your product anymore. That model is really optimized for conversion, and it's a solid model, but it leaves a lot on the table in terms of usage. And usage of your product can be extremely important in driving indirect monetization strategies. So what do I mean? We look at monetization as you will pay me money. You will pay me money. But what if you come to my product and you don't actually pay me anything, but you help me through viral loop acquire you who will pay me money? That's an indirect monetization through virality, through content loops, through even potentially paid marketing that is extremely important to understand. And trial does not account for that. It either says you either pay me money or you're not my customer. This is the joined rise of freemium. So what is freemium? You say you can pay me or you can continue using my product for free because I will still get a ton of value out of you. For example, Miro, an online whiteboard. They give you 3 boards to use completely for free. Why? Because every time I get on the board, I start collaborating with somebody. I acquire other users for Miro. And even though I might never pay for Miro, those other acquired users might become paid users. I just did marketing on behalf of Miro. Miro did not have to invest that money into Google, into AdWords, into SEO. They invested into their users, and users did their acquisition loop. So they value their free users. At SurveyMonkey, we had over 60% of our users free that were active. And that was fantastic because we had to spend 0 in marketing for first 10 years of the product. And that's not a laughable matter. So do you want to invest and make those ad platforms richer, or do you want to invest that money into your users and stand up those loops on top of them to drive the growth model for you? So freemium is a fantastic model, and I've been a huge proponent of freemium ever since the beginning. In fact, every single product that I've ever worked for or advised had a freemium model. That's my level of bar of qualification of whether I even engage with the company. But freemium is also really tough. It's hard to drive monetization awareness on top of freemium. Customers stay in their swim lane. They only use what you give them for free. And when you question them and you survey them and you ask, do you know what we actually charge for? I guarantee you, if you do that question, if you have a freemium model on your user base tomorrow, you will have close to 50 to 60% of them say, I have no idea what your monetization model is all about. So conversion rate on freemiums are fairly low, 5% on average of what I've seen. But you do have a lot of other people, close to 25% on average, continuously using your freemium, increasing your user pool that can actually participate in your growth model. Now, my favorite model is reverse trial. Reverse trial combines the best of both worlds of the trial and freemium. It does start with all of the full trial of paid offerings. That's awesome. But when the trial ends, it doesn't just cut off access. It moves back to a freemium usage. So you can choose to pay, or you can continue using for free. Most importantly, when you're going through activation in reverse trial, you get to use and build habits on the paid features, as opposed to building habits on the free features only. So it really increases your conversion rate optimization, so you get to 15% back, again, of the free-to-paid conversion, but you also get the benefit of going and having more continuous freemium usage, which again results in more participants in those loops that can participate and create inputs and outputs for you. So step number 2, who are we monetizing? It's easy to say, well, every user that is coming in through my doors, I have to be monetizing. I say that's incorrect. If you're a platform, you have a variety of customers potentially coming to you. Who is your monetization model addresses? You have to think about it from use cases. Use cases have 5 main components. They're centered around a problem that you're solving. Not persona, not industry, not feature, not value proposition. What is the customer problem that this use cases solve? In your customer's words, not in your words. I do this or I solve this. No, I have this problem and I'm looking for this solution. In your customer's words, your use case's nucleus is the customer problem. Then you look at personas. Hopefully, many personas can fit under the same problem. That's platform approach, and that's incredible. Then you have to be clear about your alternatives. Your alternatives might be an old way of doing things manually, or alternative may be a named competitor that you're playing against. You need to know who you are playing against so you can win against them. I think it's a mistake not to name the competitors. I think it's a mistake not to know who you need to neutralize, because it's important to understand customer view of your monetization model and who they are comparing you to. You might think that you're building the best product in the world and competition is of no concern, but your customers are doing research on you. So know what they're looking at. Know what they're evaluating. Next one is why. Why would they choose you over the alternative? What's your advantage? They usually fall into 3 categories of why people choose your product. 1, you solve for their price. You're cheaper. It's a good one, but who wants to be in the price war with their competition? It's just the road down to the bottom. The second one, you save me time. So you're efficient. That's good too. That's a lot of productivity promise where you're just going to save me time. So something that used to take me an hour, 2 hours to do, I'm able to do with you for 5 to 10 minutes. But the third one, and the most important one, you save me pain. So you're not just efficient, you are effective. You make me better as an employee, as a consumer. You make my life easier. That's the best why to hook into. If you have to compete on price, that's fine, but try to either compete on time or on pain against your competitors, because the much stronger value points to win your customers. And frequency. And you might say, Elena, why are we talking about frequency here and retention if we're talking about use cases and monetization? And that's because we don't want to build a product that doesn't have retention. So the use cases that we pick need to be not in the forgettable zone. So we need to pick use cases at the beginning that are on daily, weekly, maybe monthly frequency of use, that are going to build a healthy business for me, that is not going to create a leaky bucket. Is every use case should be high in nature, high in frequency in nature? No. But don't have your core use cases be in the forgettable zone. That's an uphill battle and so much harder to solve for, as opposed to first picking use cases that are highly frequent in nature. And by the way, 3 here, 3 use cases, tops to start with, because focus is the key. If you have 10 use cases at the beginning of your product journey, you're stretching yourself way too thin. As a part of the go-to-market expansion, you add additional use cases to your platform, and you focus on those use cases. But don't start with more than 3, because it's incredibly hard to actually solve for 3, let alone, as opposed to going after 10 or 15. So we're at Amplitude and Amplify, so let's tear down what is the use case for Amplitude's analytics product. The problem is, I need to understand how my customers are using the product so I can make better decisions. In customers' words. My personas are product managers, marketers, analysts, engineers, growth PMs, growth marketers. That's the power of the platform. It applies to all. They all have the same problem. Alternatives, we're not going to talk about them in here, but we can discuss it offline. Why? It saves me time, it gets me data fast. And number 2, it saves me pain, something that was inaccessible before. So something that was so painful to get before, and I didn't understand what it was, it gives me ability to go through it quickly. And frequency, on the org level, it's daily. Because we have multiple teammates within the org, and all of them come into Amplitude and use it throughout the week, creating daily frequency of use. Perfect use case. So now that we have our use cases, we do need to start thinking about our monetization model. So what is it that's going to match it? But before we do that, we're not going to reinvent it. In step 3, we're going to fit our existing monetization model to use cases that we've identified. What are the parts of the monetization model? It's scale, what, amount, and when. Remember how that very closely correlated to frictions? Because your monetization model is a friction. So our components of monetization model try to resolve those frictions. Scale, how does our price scale? What are we monetizing on? Amount, how much do we charge? When do we charge? Let's go back to Amplitude example of how we would break it down for the 3 plans that Amplitude has. So Amplitude has plans that are based on the complexity of use increase. So the starter plan, which is a freemium plan, is the low complexity of use, and then going all the way to enterprise when complexity of use increases. So our scale is per event. Everything that you will get in each of the plan anchors on event. How many events you send to us? That's our scale. What? We have both usage metric and feature metric. I will go through that in a second. But the starter plan has a limit of 10 million events with basic analytics. Growth has unlimited events, custom events based on your event volume, behavioral analytics, SSO, support and services, and so on. Amount, 0 for free. Custom, based on your custom event volume for growth and enterprise. And when? Starter will be never. It's just the freemium. And then growth will be annual recurring with enterprise annual recurring as well. So step number 4. How will we sell to these use cases with this monetization model? There's 2 ways to sell: product-led and sales-led. What is product-led? Your product is able to do self-serve monetization. It's a beautiful story with low CAC, low ARPA, by the way, too. The monetization opportunity for self-serve caps out at about $10,000 a year. But it's a low CAC, maybe less than $10 even. It's an end user persona you build for people that are going to be using your product, and it has a very low friction. And guess what? Accountability on the revenue in product-led monetization lies on product team. Is your product team ready if you have self-serve monetization? Do they hold the revenue target? Can I see a show of hands if you have self-serve monetization, that your product team holds revenue target accountability? A few. It's actually not that common, which is surprising. If you're self-serve monetizing, your product drives monetization. Your product team has to hold the revenue target. But traditionally speaking, product teams have not been comfortable doing it. And growth has become a really good bridge towards educating product team of how to hold revenue target, and a lot of it falls on growth team, which is fantastic. But if you have product-led self-serve monetization, your product has to have revenue targets. Now, sales-led is in the other way. You have either your internal sales team, your partner team, your reseller team selling your product. Why would we do that? Well, we get such high average contract values. We can be closing $1 million deals. In fact, in most of the sales-led model, the sales floor is $15,000, much higher than 10 grand that you would be able to get on self-serve. So you have these awesome ACVs, but you also have incredibly high acquisition cost. I'm seeing in the space right now that the leads, cost of a lead, can push $10,000. So if you're competing on LinkedIn, if you're competing on AdWords, that distribution channel challenge that Adam has mentioned is real. And in B2B especially, it's becoming to run out of the proportion, and it's absolutely debilitating marketing teams to actually provide good cost of revenue to the business. But you do target enterprise buyer persona with higher friction, and your sales and marketing are accountable for your revenue. That's pretty normal, and we're very much comfortable with that. Ideally, you'd actually want to sell in both channels. I wouldn't recommend starting in both, but I do think the most successful companies have to play in both. But you cannot play in both just in self-serve and just in top-down sales, because that creates channel conflict internally. Your sales team will be pointing finger at your self-serve saying, I didn't hit my quota because they went with self-serve. And your self-serve team is going to say, what value is sales team adding? I could have closed that customer on self-serve. So you don't want that internal competition. And product-led sales becomes a perfect bridge for that gap. So if you're going to have in the company both self-serve and sales-led, you also have to create a lane of product-led. What does product-led sales do? It starts with usage, very much like self-serve. Whether self-serve monetization occurs or not is actually irrelevant, but what's important is the product qualifies the customer for sales conversation. So instead of traditional flow of MQL, SQL, closed won, and then we have some usage, we're flipping that upside down and starting with usage, product qualifying a lead, closing a sale, and then we get revenue. So our pipeline focus in sales top-down is MQLs. Our pipeline focus in product-led sales is usage. And that's a beautiful story to focus on. Focusing your team on driving more usage of the product that will generate your sales revenue is the much better position to be in than putting all of that pressure on marketing team to generate your MQLs. This is not for every industry and category, although I see a transformation happening across all, and this is where most of the disruption of large enterprises is occurring. So I highly consider you at least scoping out and seeing if you can play in all three channels, and if you're actually assessing those three channels correctly. So let's get back to those value metrics that I said. Because now we need to talk about what is it that we actually scale that we'll be monetizing. There's two axes here. On x-axis, we have predictability to our customer. How easy is it for us to know how much we're going to have to pay? And on the y-axis is alignment to customer outcome. How much, if I make money, do they get value at the same time? There's three value metrics, which is features, usage, and outcome that you can choose from. Features is the easiest one. We all love to build features. And we release those features, we want to monetize on those features. And features are extremely predictable to the customer, which is awesome, but it has no alignment of whether the customer actually achieved the outcome they were striving. So they buy the feature, but whether they use it or not, we are not aligned to actually make sure that it happens. So feature-based monetization models are strong, but they have some downfalls, and I'll talk about it in just a second. Usage is one of the best metrics to make sure that you anchor your monetization model on. So usage can be per event, like we do at Amplitude. It can be per user, like Miro does. And that is important because you actually more aligned with customer outcome. If they're using it, that's when you start getting revenue. That's good. It also covers your cost fairly well. Usage is very closely aligned to cost. And predictability, though, is a little bit lower. So you have to be careful because customer might not actually know how much usage they're going to have to pay for. And when it comes to enterprise contracts, like Slack, they have active user as their main metric. They have a lot of friction with enterprises trying to figure out how many active users am I actually going to have in my enterprise. So it does introduce a little bit of a friction. The best metric for customers is an outcome one. What is an outcome metric? If you book a stay through Airbnb, Airbnb will take a cut of the transaction. They only make money if you find a host that you want to rent from. It's a taking percentage of their outcome, and it's an outcome-based monetization model. It's beautiful because it's a full alignment to what customers actually outcomes they were looking to get, but it has very low predictability to a customer. So it's hard to come in with an outcome-based because it creates a lot of distrust because I don't know how much I'm going to pay, but it's really great in the well-established categories to differentiate yourself from competitions by being more outcome-based. But outcome-based metric is not for everyone. I'm going to pick on Miro again. What is Miro's promise? Improve your collaboration. That's an outcome. Can they take a cut of that? No, I don't even know how to measure it. I mean, maybe some companies are sophisticated enough to know how well collaboration is going, but it's impossible for Mira to be an outcome-based monetization model. So they go to usage-based. So if you hit past 3 board limit, then you have to go pay and you get unlimited boards. So see if outcome even makes sense for you. For most of the marketplace products, it does. For most of the B2B software products, it doesn't. But there's always nuances to every rule. So what is it for Amplitude? Our event move from starter to growth is a usage-based trigger. Most of the monetization that we drive at the company is when you hit past that 10 million events. And then we have basic analytics, behavioral analytics, SSO, and even services as features. Now you say, wait a second. Why is unlimited users in there? Users feels like a usage metric. Not when it's unlimited. Per event, you get unlimited users across all of the plans. That's a feature. That's not a usage. Usage is when it actually ties to scale. And Amplitude does not use users as a scale metric. So a couple of the takeaways, a couple of just gotchas. Outcome metrics are not for everyone. We already talked about it. Usage metrics can be overdone too. You never want to have more than 1 or 2, maybe 3 usage metrics for your product. Why? Our minds can process 1 dimension, can fairly well process 2 dimensions. 3 dimensions of understanding how you're monetizing me is starting to stretch the limit. If you have more than 3, I cannot comprehend it anymore. The friction goes way up. Usage metric is meant to reduce the friction. But if you start layering more and more and more of them, thinking, oh, well, let's say Amplitude. I want to charge per event, per user, per report. I don't even know how to actually comprehend of what my cost is going to be. So pick at least singular usage metric, maybe go down to 2. Feature strategy. If you don't have usage and you only have feature, it's a dangerous one. It's fantastic to differentiate complexities and create plans that are differentiated on features, but be careful at anchoring your product on feature-only monetization because it creates sleeping bears. And sleeping bears is the worst thing that you can possibly create in your monetization model. What is a sleeping bear? I come into the product, I buy it for features, but I don't actually use it. Or maybe I used it once, but I paid for a year, and I haven't been using it since. I'm a paying customer, I contribute to your revenue, but I'm not a user anymore. What happens if you poke me and remind me that I'm still paying for your product? I wake up, and what do? I churn. Your 1 email, your 1 newsletter can spike your churn all of a sudden because you have a bunch of sleeping bears in your user base that is like a bomb that is sitting and waiting to explode any time that you actually try to reach out to them. If you already have sleeping bears in your product, and by the way, a lot of gyms have a ton of sleeping bears. Think about how many people sign up for gym and never go. Nutritional apps have a lot of sleeping bears because you have that kick saying, I need to lose that couple of pounds, and then you lose steam and you never use it. So be careful about creating sleeping bears, and if you do, try to see if you can tie it to usage. It might reduce your monetization potential short term, but most importantly, will create a healthy paid user base, as opposed to being afraid to email to those customers because it's going to spike your churn. You've been warned. Don't do sleeping bears. So what is our monetization strategy? We have use cases. We fit our model to those use cases. Now we need to understand interaction with growth loops. We need to understand the cost of revenue, and we need to understand our consumer view. Doing use case to monetization model fit is a model change exercise. And that's the hardest thing to ever embark on, because model changes propagate through the entire organization and everybody in your company will be a stakeholder. However, optimizing your model across consumer view, growth loops, and cost of revenue is the optimization. And you can get a ton of value out of your monetization work just doing optimizations without ever touching the model. And by the way, I never recommend touching model first. Always start with optimizations, because you want to find your local maxima first before you embark on finding your global maxima. Because finding global maxima will be hard if your organization is not already prepped to do local maximas. And by the way, most conversion and monetization issues are not that hard to solve. A lot of it, as I said, stems in awareness. I'm going to give you an example. I advise for an incredible company, MongoDB. It's a cloud database company. And they have a free plan, and then they have paid plans. And at the beginning of the journey, they ask you, hey, do you want to use our free plan, or do you want to go and build a paid cluster? And if customer picked a free plan, they used to only show them free features to remove friction to make sure that they activate as fast as possible. And then the team said, let's actually test driving monetization awareness. So in the cluster builder, they started adding those grayed out with the dollar symbols, territories, and then there's a bunch of below the fold as well, of showing free customers that, hey, you can unlock this too. You just need to upgrade. And these are the customers that specifically said, I want to use free only. And they ran this as an experiment, and they got a double-digit lift of free-to-paid conversion of just showing what you possibly can buy inside the product, as opposed to assuming that they know what to show and not to show to a customer. The second biggest strategy that you should look into is aligning your monetization usage to your growth model, to your growth loops. I'm going to give another example of Crisp. I also advise for Crisp. It's a noise cancellation software. If you ever have a Zoom call with me, you're not going to be able to hear my screaming kids that are out of school for the next 2 months, or that lawnmower that's going outside, because it cancels out all of the noise on video calls. But they had their monetization model that focused on 240 free minutes per week, which was means for their activation. That way you get to experience the value of the product, and hopefully you will upgrade. But when we did the retention analysis, it was daily frequency of use. So majority of people would burn through those minutes in the first day and would never be able to establish a habit in the free state with the product to actually trigger monetization. We switched it to 90 minutes a day, 25% lift of free-to-paid conversion. Some of the smallest changes without actually changing your monetization model can have the biggest impact. Monetization work is hard. Sometimes it feels like herding cats, and I get it. I've done it my entire career. But it's a necessary step for you to actually build a sustainable and successful company. So remember, there's model use case fit, there's optimizations that you can do. Allow your growth teams to own optimizations. Optimizations don't impact your growth model. Allow them to also collect the data on model changes without making the final decision. Create a monetization council to decide on those model changes. It will include sales, product, marketing, support, anybody else who's a big stakeholder. Allow your teams to collect the data and allow the council to actually make data-driven decisions on monetization changes. All of this is all part of our Reforge courses. Adam went through the Growth Series course. I gave you an overview of our monetization course. Go to reforge.com to check it out if you want to learn more. Otherwise, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of the day.